In this tutorial, we're going to look at OSC, or Open Sound Control Messages, and network communication. We're using our postage stamp sketch here, and if you recall, or if you remember from your last tutorial, basically we created a little postage stamp of generated graphics, and everywhere we click, it gets a sort of a randomly generated graphic, the size of a little square up to ourselves. Okay, so that works there. Now, first thing we have to look at is installing the OSCP5 library. So I'll go through this very quickly because I don't think I've covered this in the other tutorials. Basically, the easiest way really to install a library is to, within processing, go to Sketch, Import Library, and Add Library. And then you can just go ahead and look for the library you're looking for example, OSCP5. Okay, and then it's already installed, but if in fact it wasn't, you can just say install and it'll install it for you. There's a more manual way, is to go to the processing website and go to libraries and look for the contributions. And here you might find OSCP5. It'll take you to his website and you can download the zip. The zip, then you unzip it. Where did it end up? Okay, you would unzip it, you would bring a folder up, and then it gives you install instructions, but in fact what you would do is you would put it into documents, generally, processing within documents, and then in libraries in the processing folder. And you just go ahead and drag that folder in here, and that would install it, restart processing, and then you're all set. But I already have it installed. So let me close that just to show you how to get that. Once you've installed the library, if you go to File and Examples, you will see a load of examples that from each of the libraries under this folder, Contributed Libraries. So these are all the contributed libraries I've installed, and with it for each one, most developers include some examples. Okay, so in the OSCP5 examples, we're going to look at send receive because we want to send Open Sound Control messages. Open Sound Control, I'll just give a very brief explanation. I explained this in class, and you can look it up. OSC is Open Sound Control, and it's a bit like MIDI, except much more flexible. It's a protocol, and it's used for sending messages within programs, kind of programs on the same computer you can do. You can, like Max can talk to processing, which can talk to Super Collider, and that's a handy way of using more than one platform to do different things. Or you can send messages over the network to remote locations, just like a MIDI keyboard might be able to send a message to a synth. Okay, so the first thing we need to do to get the OSC working, the OSC machine and processing working, is to import these libraries. So we're going to import OSCP5, and I'm just following the example here. .star, the wildcard, and import netp5. Okay. And then we're going to create a variable to initialize or instantiate a variable. We're going to create the machine that's going to house OSC communication in our sketch. And in order to do that, we have to create an OSCP5 object. You can call it whatever you want. It's just a variable name. I'm going to call mine me OSC. Here he calls it OSCP5. And I'm not going to make a remote location for this one because I am just receiving. My sketch is basically, it's going to be a blank canvas for someone to send me a message, and then it will draw when they send me a message. All right. And then we need to, in setup, then we need to initialize our OSCP5 engine, our variable. So me, OSC, the computer already knows that's supposed to be an OSCP5 instance of the OSCP5 method or class. And we're going to make a new one, a new OSC. What are we making a new thing of? We're making a new OSCP5. And then that has a couple arguments. First argument is its context, which is THIS, this. And this is sort of the root context. That means that this is the sketch is our context, which we'll use this. We don't have to worry about that too much right now. And then a port number, a UDP port number. And I'm just going to pick a random 1, 2, 3, 2. All right. So that's basically OSC setup. Now I can send and receive OSC messages. And let's figure out now what kind of messages I actually want to receive here. And what do I want to do when I receive that message? Okay. Now, if we look at our two functions here, mouse press and mouse release, if you recall from creating this sketch, basically, well, I can run it here now. Every time I press a mouse, hello. Every time I press a mouse, it draws a certain number of arcs, lines, and curves. And when I release it, it stops drawing and resets it so I can draw another graphic. Okay, and that's basically what these lines of code do. So basically, instead of engaging these on the mouse pressed and mouse released, I need to engage these functions based on a message that's sent to me remotely. So someone sends me a remote message with a certain tag or address, and then it engages these actions. Okay, so in order to do that, first I'm just going to comment out these two, because in fact I don't want to draw them by my mouse, but I want to draw them by other means, which OSC message. And then I'm just going to create a sort of an independent function that will do what these things are doing with the mouse. So I'm going to go void, because it's not returning anything, and I'm going to call my function draw. PS, draw the postage stamp. Okay. And then use my curly brackets to declare scope. Okay, so that there will draw my postage stamp. And what do I want to do? Well, I'll copy these over for now. All right, so it's going to turn this draw gate on so I can actually draw. And then it's going to set my X to the mouse X and the Y to the mouse Y. Well, again, we don't want to set it to our mouse X, but basically the remote location's mouse X. So they're going to draw somewhere on a remote location and send us their mouse coordinates. And then we want to actually place the X and Y position of our graphic there according to their mouse movements. Okay. Well, we're going to create a couple arguments that get sent to this function. And I'm going to make them two ints, I guess. And this will be mx and then my, the mouse x and the mouse y. And then instead of the actual mouse x, we're going to make this equal to mx. And we're going to make this equal to my. Okay. So now instead of it making the postage stamp where my mouse is, mx, it's going to make where these two things, mx and my. And these are just arguments that are passed into my function and then get passed into this and then set this variable x and y, which is the x and y location of my postage stamp. All right. And now we want to do the same thing for the release portion, or the when I release my mouse. So I'm going to do another void. We're not returning anything, and I'll call it release mouse postage stamp. Okay. And there's no arguments for this one because we're just simply going to release it. Okay. And then we're going to copy this bit of code in because these are the things we want to run when we receive a message to release the postage stamp or the drawing. Again, resetting the gate so that we can draw again, and then resetting the amount of lines, arcs, and curves. Okay. Now it's the time to connect these things with an OSC message, and this is the magical bit. In order to understand a little bit better, we're going to look at the examples again and go to this thing called plug. And this is just a method that's built into the OSC library, OSC P5 library, which is very handy. And basically, it's a forwarding type of service. It's smart, so it looks for OSC messages that come in, and we tell it which ones to look for. And then once the OSC message comes in, it'll automatically forward to a designated function, in our case, one of these functions here. And so you can look at this a little bit closely on your own time. But basically, when it receives a message, it's going to forward these to wherever this plug is asking you to forward it to. All right. So this plug is forwarding it to a method called test in your root location in the main sketch. And every time it receives this OSC tag test, it's going to forward whatever arguments come with test to this method test. Okay, and you see public void here. Test is a function just like ours, and then it's got 2 arguments that come in. So it does check for the argument, so that when the message comes in, if it's not 2 integers that follow this OSC tag test, then it won't send it. It won't forward it to this function. It has to be 2 integers. If it's a float and integer, it'll throw an error and say, no such function exists that's looking for an integer and a float. So it's very specific. Okay, and then it just runs whatever's in there once it receives that OSC message. And this will become more clear when we actually get our sender. Okay, but let's copy that that methodology. So the plugs go in setup because we have, and after our OSC machine is initialized, so we have to do that. And then the syntax is like this, just like it is over on this side. We say our OSC machine, which is in my case called me OSC, and then we say dot plug, run the function plug. Okay, and then what's the context? Well, it is the main sketch context. So we're going to say that's where the function exists. It exists on the main sketch right here. And we're going to say this. And then we're going to forward it to a method. And we have to get the name just right. So we have a method called draw postage stamp. So DRWPS. That's the method that's going to look for. And then what OSC tag do we want it to respond to? And remember, it's always this, a forward slash for OSC messages. And we'll just make it the same. DRWPS, draw postage stamp. Okay, so when I send my sketch OSC message called draw postage stamp or DRWPS, it's going to run the function DRWPS, which is this one that we made down here. And it's going to forward whatever arguments come with it into the function, which in this case is looking for 2 integers. Okay, and then it's going to set XY. Now we also need to make a plug for the release bit. So I'm just going to copy that plug. And same, still this. And in this case, it's forwarding it to the method RELPS. Okay, and I'm going to keep the tag the same when I send it the OSC tag RELPS. Okay, go ahead and save that. Great. So now if I run this, hopefully it won't error, but when I click, nothing happens because it's no longer attached to the mouse pressed and mouse released, but instead it's waiting for an OSC message. And you notice there's a bit of verbiage going on saying OSC plugin class postage stamp solution, etc., etc. Okay, so that's good and fine. It looks pretty good. Let me save that as something else. Network. Okay, now what we want to do now is, and we can get rid of the plug as well, we want to create a new sketch, and this will be our sender. Okay, and remember OSC messages can be sent on the same computer within different programs or even within 2 processing sketches. All right, so let's copy over a couple things. We're going to need this business because we do have to set up an OSC machine here as well. Okay, and we need, we're going to have a setup. And in this case, it might be nice to have it the exact same size. So size 800, 800. Okay, and background of our choice. Let's try a different one in this case because just to distinguish it, green. And then we'll copy this business here, MeOSC, to initialize our OSC machine. And remember, Command T will auto indent everything. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to use mouse pressed to send an OSC message. So now in our remote client, when we press our mouse at a certain point, we're going to send across the network our X and Y mouse locations, the mouse location of the X and Y location of our mouse. So we'll do that on mouse pressed. Oops. Okay. And then what are we going to do? Well, we'll copy here from send receive. We're going to send, right. One thing I forgot is we do have to set up a remote location, a net address. So net is going to be the address of the place we're sending it to. So we'll say whatever, PS draw. Okay, this is going to be the drawing part, the canvas where we draw the postage stamp. And then we have to set that up again after we start our OSC machine. We're going to set up this PS draw. PS draw is our remote net address that we're sending to. And we're going to create a new one. And it's going to be a net address. And then we'll make it the local host, meaning I'm just going to send it to myself. Okay, and I'm going to send it to the port that I've just decided on over here, which was 1232. So it's going to 1232. And in this case, I have to make it a different MeOSC. My host has to be a different, so we'll call that 1233. So MeOSC being this sketch's own receiving IP address, or I mean port, and this net address port being the one that's the one we're sending it to. Okay, which has, in this case, has to be the same as this one, otherwise it won't receive our messages. Okay, so that should be clear enough. Now, if you were sending it over the network to another person or another computer, you would simply put their IP address there instead. All right, so that net sender is set up. Now we have to configure a OSC message. So we go back to our send receive example, and we look at the way this message is configured. Okay, so every time the mouse is pressed, we're going to start an OSC message, OSC, and we'll give it a name. We'll call it MSG. And then we have to initialize it. It's going to be a new OSC message. And it's going to have the tag or address pattern. And in this case, what did we call it? We called it draw PS, DRWPS. Okay. And again, you'll notice that / notation. Okay, so this initializes the OSC message, and it's going to be tied to this tag draw PS. And then we're gonna grab some data from it, or we're gonna send some data. Remember, it needs those two integers to run that function in the other sketch. So we're gonna do msg.add, and then the thing we're gonna add is the mouse X and Y of our in this sketch, because that's what we want to send the location of our mouse of this sketch. So we'll use that reserved variable mouse X. Okay, that'll be the first one, and then we add another bit of data to our OSC message, and that'll be mouse Y. All right, and then finally we need to send it. So we say, and then we use our machine to send it, which is called MeOSC, and then we .send. And what are we sending? Well, we're sending the message MSG. And where are we sending it to? We're sending it to this net address PS draw. Okay, and all this stuff can be found in the help files. Now, I'm not sure you can access help this way. You might not be able to, but it's in the libraries folder in the processing, documents processing libraries, OSCP5, and then should be a reference area here. And you just click on the index, and it'll show you sort of all the very detailed information about that library. Okay. So back to our sender sketch. So we're going to send this PS draw, all right? And then we're going to send something very similar. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. When we release the mouse, we want to send a released message. Okay. And then we're going to call that REL, because that's the name we gave to the method in the receiving sketch. And we don't need to add any data because we're just sending the tag and it's going to release it. Okay. And let's call this message 2 so we don't get too confused. Message 2 to PS draw. And basically it's just going to send this tag there. But when it receives this tag, it's going to engage that function. Okay, so if we go ahead and run these two sketches, let's just open that up as well. Right. First we run the receiver, and then we'll run the drawer. And if we press, it should receive. wherever I click here, it's getting it remotely. So there you go. You have your send and receive to net clients. So of course, if I want to send this over the network, I would simply change this IP address to the IP address of another computer, and you can send it to somebody in Brazil or Tahiti as long as all the ports are open. Okay, so that's my tutorial for the remote draw and net send and receive.